Late August 1944. A cramped observation post somewhere in northern France. German technical officers at Flak Regiment 155W stare at a crumpled morning report like it's written in a language that doesn't exist. The number at the top of the page, 82%. 82% of the V-1 flying bombs launched toward London in the pre-dawn hours have been destroyed. Not damaged, not deflected, destroyed. And according to every ballistic calculation, every probability model, every physics textbook across the entire Reich, that number was impossible. Through their field telescopes, these same officers had watched it happen with their own eyes. V-1s screaming across the English Channel at over 400 miles per hour, only to suddenly disintegrate mid-flight. Flak bursts erupting around them, not hitting them directly, but exploding nearby. And somehow, impossibly, those near misses were still ripping the missiles apart. The British weren't just winning. They were breaking the laws of physics to do it. Or at least, that's what it looked like. Because what those German observers were actually witnessing was a secret so closely guarded, it was protected at the same classification level as the Manhattan Project. A technology their own scientists had declared impossible. A weapon that would rewrite the rules of modern warfare. And the Germans? They never figured it out. The nightmare began 10 weeks earlier. June 13th, 1944. Exactly 1 week after the Allies stormed the beaches at Normandy, Hitler unleashed his answer. At 4:25 in the morning, Londoners heard a sound they'd never heard before, a mechanical buzzing, like a massive hornet tearing through the sky. Then silence. Then an explosion that erased Grove Road in Bow from the map. 6 people dead, 30 injured, 200 homeless. The first strike of the Virgil Tungswaff, the vengeance weapon. The V-1 was unlike anything the world had seen. A pilotless aircraft powered by a pulse jet engine, carrying 850 kilograms of high explosives at 640 kilometers per hour. No pilot to lose. No crew to train. Just pure, automated destruction at a fraction of the cost of a traditional bombing run. It was the world's first operational cruise missile, and German high command believed it would force Britain to surrender. Their confidence wasn't arrogance. It was math. Dr. Robert Lusser, who designed the V-1's guidance system, ran the numbers over and over. British fighters would need to exceed 650 kilometers per hour just to catch up, and then close within 200 meters to shoot it down, putting themselves at massive risk of being caught in the blast. As for anti-aircraft guns, the probability of scoring a direct hit on such a small, fast-moving target was calculated at less than 1 in 10,000 shells fired. This wasn't propaganda. This was sound ballistic science, verified by some of the best weapons engineers in the world. The V-1 should have been unstoppable, but within weeks, something started going very, very wrong. By the end of June, the reports coming back to German intelligence were concerning. The British were intercepting 10% of the V-1s, higher than expected, but explainable. Training luck, maybe a few exceptionally skilled pilots willing to take insane risks. Commander Wachtel reviewed the numbers, noted them, but wasn't alarmed. 10% losses were within acceptable parameters for a new weapons system facing a desperate enemy. Then the numbers started climbing. June 24th, 17% interception rate. June 28th, 24%. Now, people were paying attention. At Flak Regiment 155W headquarters, technical officers began pulling detailed reports from coastal observers. They needed to understand what was happening. The initial assumption was that the RAF had redeployed their fastest fighters, maybe the new Tempest V models that could actually catch a V-1 in level flight. Dangerous work, but possible. The British were desperate enough to try it. But when the detailed observer logs came in, they told a different story. One that made no sense. Lieutenant Hans Müller, stationed at an observation post near Calais, filed a report on July 3rd that his commanding officer initially rejected as inaccurate. Müller reported watching a V-1 launch at dawn, tracking it through binoculars as it crossed the channel. Altitude approximately 800 meters, speed normal, pulse jet functioning perfectly. As it approached the English coast, he saw the familiar black puffs of anti-aircraft fire. But something was wrong with the pattern. The flak bursts weren't appearing in a scattered wall. The normal British technique of throwing up a barrier of explosions and hoping the V1 flew through one. These bursts were appearing in clusters, tracking the missile. 3 explosions erupted maybe 15 meters to the left of the V1. Then nothing for a few seconds. Then 4 more bursts, closer this time, maybe 10 meters away. The V1 kept flying. The shells hadn't touched it. Then a single burst appeared slightly ahead and above the missile, maybe 20 meters away. Mueller watched the V1's right wing fold upward like paper in a fire. The missile rolled, pitched nose down, and went into the channel, trailing black smoke. Mueller's report noted, no visible impact. Structural failure from near miss at distance, exceeding lethal fragmentation radius. His commanders sent it back with a note, recheck calculations. Shrapnel pattern insufficient at reported distance. But Mueller's calculations were correct, and 3 days later, a dozen more observers were filing identical reports. By July 10th, the interception rate hit 31%. At German weapons testing facilities, engineers started running probability models. Dr. Ernst Steinhoff, one of the lead scientists at Piemont, produced a mathematical analysis that should have been reassuring. He calculated that even with improved British radar and optimal gun placement, achieving better than 25% interception would require ammunition expenditure rates that were logistically impossible. The British simply couldn't be firing that many shells. So they checked ammunition counts. And that's when things got really disturbing. Coastal observers with high magnification optics weren't just watching V1s die. They were counting muzzle flashes from British gun positions. And the numbers didn't work. A battery of 4 guns would fire maybe 30 shells total, then score a kill. Another battery, 18 shells, 1 kill. The ammunition expenditure per successful interception was impossibly low. Steinhoff's report on July 15th noted, either British munitions efficiency has increased by a factor of 10, or observers are systematically miscounting. But the observers weren't miscounting. They were watching reality break. Captain Friedrich Weber, stationed at Observation Post 7 near Boulogne, filed what might be the most detailed account. On July 18th, he watched 11 V1s launch in a salvo at dawn. Perfect conditions, clear sky, good visibility, minimal wind. He tracked all 11 through naval telescopes. The first V1 made it past the coast. The second was hit by a fighter. He saw the Tempest close to within 100 meters, saw the cannon fire, saw the V1 explode. Textbook interception. The third V1 entered the coastal gun zone at 0634 hours. Weber counted 8 guns firing, roughly 40 shells in total. Most fell short. 3 exploded well behind the missile. 2 burst high, maybe 50 meters above it. Then 1 shell detonated perhaps 12 meters to the right of the V1, slightly below its flight path. Weber noted he could clearly see empty air between the explosion and the missile. No possible contact. The V1 should have flown right through. Instead, it shuddered. The pulse jet cut out. The entire aircraft seemed to crumple inward, like an invisible fist had grabbed it. It fell almost straight down. Weber wrote, structural failure without observable cause. No shrapnel impact visible. Explosion occurred outside effective fragmentation range. Requesting technical analysis. He watched 6 more V1s die the same way over the next 90 minutes. Explosions near them, but not hitting them. Yet the missiles disintegrated anyway. By July 25th, the interception rate was 46%. At German High Command, people were starting to use words like impossible in official reports. Not unlikely or unexpected, impossible. The statistics violated known principles of ballistics and probability. General Erich Heinemann, overseeing V-weapon deployment, ordered a comprehensive technical review. Every V1 was inspected before launch. Fuel mixtures tested. Guidance gyroscopes calibrated. They even suspected British sabotage at the manufacturing facilities. Maybe agents were weakening the airframes so they'd break apart under mild stress. Inspections found nothing. Test flights over France showed the missiles were structurally sound. On August 1st, the interception rate hit 60%. Now, there was genuine panic in the command structure. The V-1 offensive was supposed to be Hitler's answer to D-Day, the weapon that would break British morale and force a negotiated peace. Instead, 6 out of every 10 missiles were being destroyed before reaching their targets, and nobody could explain how. Technical officers started proposing theories that got progressively more desperate. Maybe the British had developed a new type of explosive shell with a vastly expanded fragmentation radius. Maybe they'd invented some kind of directional charge that could throw shrapnel 30 meters. Maybe they were using rockets instead of shells, something with a proximity trigger. That last theory got dismissed immediately. Everyone knew proximity fuses were impossible. Germany's best scientists had tried for years. The concept was sound, but the engineering was fantasy. You couldn't fit a functional radio transmitter inside an artillery shell and expect it to survive being fired. The G-forces would destroy any vacuum tube ever made. The circuits would shatter. The batteries would rupture. But they were running out of explanations. Lieutenant Ernst Roth, a Luftwaffe technical intelligence officer, wrote in his August 7th assessment, British anti-aircraft effectiveness has increased to levels that contradict all established ballistic models. Either our fundamental understanding of explosive physics is incomplete, or the British have deployed technology we cannot currently explain. That report made it all the way to Max Wachtel's desk. He read it twice, then filed it without comment. What could he say? That the laws of physics were different over England? The coastal observers kept watching, kept counting, kept filing reports that all said the same thing. Shells were exploding near the V-1s, not hitting them, and somehow that was enough. On August 10th, a German observation team, using specialized photographic equipment, managed to capture a sequence of images that would later become near legendary in military intelligence circles. The photos showed a V-1 in flight, 3 sequential flak bursts creating a triangular pattern around it, ahead, above, and to the side. Closest explosion, approximately 18 meters away. The 4th photo showed the V-1 with its tail section separated from the fuselage. The photos were analyzed by weapons experts, physicists, and explosive specialists. Their conclusion: structural failure inconsistent with observed blast proximity. Unknown mechanism. By August 15th, the interception rate was 74%. 3 out of every 4 V-1s were being destroyed. The offensive that was supposed to break Britain had become a resource drain that was achieving almost nothing. And then came August 28th. On that single day, the British coastal gun belt achieved an 82% destruction rate. 82%. The morning report that landed on German command desks the next morning might as well have been written in code. Officers stared at it like it was a document from another universe. The math didn't just fail to explain it. The math said it couldn't happen. You could throw 100,000 shells into the air and you wouldn't get an 82% kill rate on fast-moving aerial targets with conventional fuses. The statistics were impossible, yet every observer confirmed it. The telescopes didn't lie. The wreckage falling into the channel was real. At observation post 4 near Calais, the technical staff stopped trying to rationalize what they were seeing. One officer was overheard saying, "It's like they've taught the shells to think." He was joking, a bitter joke about an impossible situation. But he was also, without knowing it, exactly correct. Because what those officers were watching through their telescopes, what their mathematics couldn't explain and their physics said shouldn't exist, was the proximity fuse. A miniature radio brain inside every Allied shell, thinking in microseconds, measuring its own distance to the target, and detonating at the perfect moment of lethality. The technology German scientists had proven was impossible. The weapon their intelligence services had dismissed as Allied disinformation. The device that over 30 German research teams had failed to create. It was operational. It was mass-produced. And it was systematically destroying Hitler's vengeance weapon with a precision that German engineering couldn't match and German physics said shouldn't exist. The observers kept watching, kept counting, kept filing reports full of numbers that didn't make sense. And across the channel, British gun crews kept loading shells marked VT without knowing what the letters meant, firing them on command, and watching the impossible happen. The secret was working perfectly, and the Germans, staring at statistics that violated their understanding of reality, never even came close to figuring it out. Here's the part that makes this story almost painful. The Germans had been warned. Back in November 1939, an anonymous package arrived at the British Embassy in Oslo, Norway. Inside was a detailed intelligence report on German weapons research, rocket development, radar, infrared technology. But buried in those pages was also a mention that the Allies were researching proximity-triggered fuses for artillery shells. German intelligence obtained a copy. Their top scientists read it, and they dismissed the proximity fuse section as obvious Allied disinformation. Why? Because they knew, with absolute certainty, that it was impossible. They knew because they tried. Over 30 different German research teams had attempted to create a working proximity fuse. Every single design failed. The technical challenges were absurd. You need to fit a miniature radio transmitter and receiver inside an artillery shell. That shell would then be fired from a cannon, subjecting every component to forces exceeding 20,000 times gravity, while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute. Vacuum tubes shattered. Circuits crushed into powder. Batteries failed on contact. No matter what they tried, German engineers couldn't make the physics work. So when intelligence suggested the Allies had solved these problems, their reaction wasn't skepticism. It was certainty that it was a lie. German physics had proven it couldn't be done. Meanwhile, on January 5, 1943, the American cruiser USS Helena shot down a Japanese dive bomber in the Pacific using a shell that detonated when it sensed proximity to the aircraft. The first combat kill using technology the Germans knew was impossible. By the time the V1 campaign started 18 months later, proximity fuses were being mass-produced by the tens of thousands. The weapon the Germans had declared fantasy was already rewriting the war. And they had no idea. By midsummer 1944, the British had transformed their entire coastal defense into a technological kill zone that would have seemed like science fiction just a year earlier. They relocated every anti-aircraft battery from the inland positions to a concentrated belt along the southern coast. The official explanation was better firing angles and response time. The secret reason? Any dud shells would fall into the English Channel, making it impossible for the Germans to recover an intact proximity fuse. The system they built was terrifyingly efficient. American-made SCR 584 radar units would lock onto an incoming V1 the instant it crossed the coastline. The radar automatically calculated speed, altitude, and trajectory, then fed real-time firing solutions directly to the gun batteries. No human guesswork, no manual calculations. The guns tracked the target automatically. Then they fired shells equipped with the VT fuse, officially called the variable time fuse, a deliberately misleading name designed to make capture examples seem like conventional timed explosives rather than the revolutionary proximity sensors they actually were. Inside each shell was a miniature radio transmitter, smaller than anything the Germans thought possible. As the shell screamed toward its target, spinning violently, the fuse began transmitting a continuous radio signal. When that signal bounced off the metal skin of a V1 and reflected back, the change in frequency triggered a thyrotron switch. Instantly, the detonator fired. The shell exploded. Steel fragments tore through the V1's aluminum hull at precisely the moment of maximum lethality. The transformation was absolute. Before proximity fuses, destroying a single V1 required an average of 2,500 heavy anti-aircraft shells. With the VT fuse, that number dropped to 100, a 25-to-1 improvement in efficiency. And here's the wildest part. Even the British gun crews firing these shells didn't know what made them so effective. They were issued special ammunition with strict accounting requirements. Every shell was tracked. Every dud was immediately secured. Naval vessels patrolled the channel specifically to prevent German recovery. The proximity fuse was so secret that the soldiers using it weren't allowed to know it existed. But while the British were keeping secrets, the Americans were waging a completely different kind of war. While German scientists were handcrafting V1s in underground facilities using slave labor, American factories were mass-producing the weapon that would defeat them at a scale that defies imagination. The CrossSteel Corporation, a company that before the war manufactured radios and refrigerators in Cincinnati, Ohio, had converted its entire production line. At peak capacity, they were producing 16,000 proximity fuses every single day. Not prototypes, not limited runs. 16,000 fully functional, combat-ready units rolling off assembly lines daily. Sylvania Electric, known for light bulbs and consumer electronics, dedicated its entire vacuum tube research division to developing ruggedized components that could survive being fired from a cannon. They were producing 400,000 miniaturized, reinforced vacuum tubes per day. 400,000 daily. By August 1944, American industry was churning out 40,000 proximity fuses every 24 hours. The cost had plummeted from $732 per unit in 1942 to just $18 by 1945. 22 million fuses would be produced by war's end. Over 80,000 workers employed across 110 compartmentalized factories. And here's what makes this even more remarkable. Most of those workers had no idea what they were building. At Sylvania's facility in Ipswich, over 5,000 women worked 12-hour shifts assembling specialized components. They had security clearances. They knew the work was classified, but they didn't discover until after the war that they'd helped save London from Hitler's terror weapons. The contrast couldn't be sharper. Germany was using concentration camp prisoners, people dying by the thousands in tunnels beneath the Harz Mountains, to hand-assemble complex weapons in limited quantities. America had transformed its consumer electronics industry into a precision military production machine, staffed by paid volunteers working overtime, building revolutionary technology at unprecedented scale. In 1 month, American factories produced more proximity fuses than Germany produced V1 missiles during the entire war. 1 month versus 4 years. The industrial mismatch was so extreme, it was almost embarrassing. Germany was crafting perfect individual weapons. America was building good weapons by the millions. And in modern warfare, that difference is everything. But back in Germany, none of this was visible. All they saw were their weapons failing. And the hunt for answers was about to get desperate. Max Wachtel didn't sleep much in August of 1944. As the commander overseeing the entire V1 offensive, he'd built his career on precision, discipline, and an engineer's faith in mathematics. He understood probability. He understood ballistics. He understood what was possible and what wasn't. And what was happening over the English Channel wasn't possible. On August 29th, the day after the 82% interception rate, Wachtel called an emergency meeting at Flak Regiment 155W headquarters. 16 officers crowded into a room designed for 8. The mood wasn't just tense, it was bordering on paranoid. Someone suggested that British intelligence had infiltrated the launch sites. Someone else proposed that the V1s were being sabotaged during manufacturing. A Luftwaffe liaison officer half-seriously suggested the British had developed some kind of death ray. Wachtel shut down the speculation and issued direct orders. Comprehensive inspections of every V1 before launch. Full technical reviews. Anyone who found even the slightest anomaly was to report it immediately, regardless of how minor it seemed. Over the next 72 hours, German technical teams inspected 847 V1 missiles. They checked airframe integrity, pulse jet function, fuel mixture ratios, gyroscope calibration, explosive charge composition, and guidance system accuracy. They disassembled random units completely, looking for evidence of tampering, manufacturing defects, or sabotage. They found nothing. The missiles were perfect. Captain Klaus Zimmermann, Chief of Technical Inspection, filed his report on September 2nd. All units inspected show nominal specifications. No evidence of sabotage, manufacturing variance, or structural weakness. Missiles are performing exactly as designed, but they were still dying at impossible rates. So Wachtell ordered test launches over German-controlled territory, flights that would never reach England, just long enough to verify the V-1s could sustain flight under combat conditions. On September 4th, they launched 6 test missiles over northern France, tracking them with observers and radar. All 6 performed flawlessly. Stable flight, consistent speed, no structural failures. The problem only manifested when the V-1s encountered British defenses, which left one terrifying conclusion. The British had developed something new, something German intelligence knew nothing about, something that was making their calculations obsolete. Wachtell wasn't a man prone to panic, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was fighting blind. He sent an urgent request to German High Command. British anti-aircraft effectiveness indicates deployment of unknown technology. Request immediate intelligence assessment and technical countermeasure development. The response came back within a day, signed by General der Flak-Artillerie Wolfgang Pickard. Proceed with tactical variations to determine British defensive limitations. Intelligence assessment ongoing. Translation: figure out yourself. We don't know either. So Wachtell and his staff began systematically varying every parameter they could control, trying to find a weakness in whatever the British were doing. September 8th to 12th. Altitude variation tests. The first theory was that British radar had difficulty tracking targets at certain altitudes. Maybe the mysterious kill zone only worked within a specific flight envelope. They launched V-1s at maximum altitude, 2,700 meters, pushing the upper limits of the guidance system's capability. Interception rate, 79%. They tried low-altitude launches, skimming just 600 meters above sea level, hoping to exploit ground clutter and make radar tracking harder. Interception rate, 81%. They tried randomizing altitude mid-flight, setting the gyroscopes to oscillate between 1,000 and 2,000 meters. Interception rate, 77%. Altitude didn't matter. Whatever the British were doing worked at any flight level. September 13th to 18th. Timing and mass launch experiments. Next theory. Maybe the British system needed time to acquire targets. If they overwhelmed the defenses with simultaneous launches, maybe some V-1s would slip through while the guns were occupied. They launched salvos of 12 V-1s within 60-second windows, hoping to saturate the gun belt. The British destroyed them at the same rate as single launches. On September 15th, they tried launching 24 missiles in a 3-minute window, the largest single salvo of the campaign. 20 missiles were destroyed. Interception rate, 83%. The British weren't being overwhelmed because they weren't relying on manual targeting. Each gun battery was operating independently, each shell making its own decision about when to detonate. But the Germans didn't know that. Lieutenant Werner Hartmann, who'd analyzed the salvo results, wrote in his September 16th report, "Enemy defensive capacity appears unlimited. Increased launch volume produces no corresponding decrease in interception effectiveness. Recommend exploring non-volume-based countermeasures." September 19th to 25th, night operations. Wachtell's staff theorized that whatever radar system the British were using might be less effective at night. Radar was line-of-sight technology. Maybe darkness introduced complications. They shifted to predominantly night launches. September 20th, 23:45 hours, 14 V-1s launched under cover of darkness. Interception rate, 74%. Slightly better, but not enough to matter. And the night launches came with their own problems. Harder for German observers to track success rates, more navigation errors, higher abort rates from guidance failures. By September 23rd, they'd abandoned the night launch emphasis. It wasn't worth the operational complications for a marginal improvement that was still nowhere near acceptable. September 26th to 30th, weather exploitation. Next idea, adverse weather. Heavy cloud cover, rain, fog, conditions that would interfere with visual targeting and potentially degrade radar performance. They waited for bad weather over the channel and launched during storms. September 27th saw launches in heavy rain and 400-meter cloud ceiling. Interception rate, 71%. September 29th, dense fog, visibility under 200 meters. Interception rate, 69%. Better but still catastrophic. And weather-dependent operations meant losing the initiative. You couldn't fight a war by waiting for fog. October 3rd, the physics review. By early October, Wachtell was receiving pressure from above to explain why the V-1 offensive was failing to achieve strategic objectives. He requested a comprehensive technical review from the weapons research staff at Piedmont. Dr. Ernst Steinhoff and a team of ballistics experts spent a week analyzing observer reports, interception statistics, and photographic evidence. Their report, delivered October 10th, was 13 pages of detailed mathematical analysis that concluded with a paragraph that essentially admitted defeat. British anti-aircraft effectiveness cannot be explained by conventional radar-directed fire control alone. Observer reports consistently document missile destruction from shell bursts occurring outside calculated lethal fragmentation radius. 3 possible explanations. 1. British have developed explosive charges with vastly expanded shrapnel pattern. 2. British are using proximity-triggered detonation systems. Or 3. Observer distance calculations are systematically incorrect. Explanation 3 is ruled out by photographic evidence. Explanation 1 is possible but would require explosive technology significantly beyond known Allied capabilities. Explanation 2 is theoretically optimal but considered technologically unfeasible based on German research failures. In other words, we don't know, and the most logical answer is something we've already proven is impossible. There was a fourth option nobody wanted to say out loud. Maybe German science had been wrong about what was possible. October 15th to 28th, the desperation phase. With no technical solutions emerging, Wachtell's operations became increasingly desperate. They tried launching from different sites, thinking maybe the British had pre-sighted specific trajectories. Didn't work. They tried modified warheads, thinking maybe the explosive signature was being detected. Didn't work. They even tried launching damaged V-1s with deliberately degraded performance, theorizing that maybe the British system was optimized for nominal flight characteristics and would struggle with erratic targets. The damaged missiles flew worse and got shot down at the same rate. Captain Dieter Koch, one of Wachtell's senior tactical officers, wrote in his private journal on October 22nd, "We are fighting an enemy we cannot see, using weapons we do not understand, achieving victories we cannot explain. Every countermeasure fails. Every theory proves wrong. It is like fighting shadows." The psychological toll was mounting. Officers who'd been confident in July were demoralized by October. The V-1 offensive, which was supposed to be a technological triumph, had become a humiliating demonstration of German impotence. And then came December. December 16th, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. When Germany launched its surprise offensive through the Ardennes, it was a desperate gamble to split Allied forces and capture the port of Antwerp. The initial assault caught American forces off guard, and in the chaos of the first 72 hours, German troops overran dozens of Allied positions. On December 18th, elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division captured an American ammunition depot near Malmedy, Belgium. It was a significant prize. Hundreds of tons of artillery shells, small arms ammunition, mortar rounds, and other ordnance. The depot was catalogued by Hauptmann Friedrich Becker, a munitions specialist attached to the division. His job was to identify what could be used immediately and what should be sent back for analysis. Becker's team worked through the night, sorting shells by caliber and type. Most of it was standard American ordnance, nothing unusual. But one section of the depot contained wooden crates stenciled with markings Becker hadn't seen before. VT Fuse, handle with care, positively NO drill. The truth finally came out after Germany's surrender. Allied intelligence officers began interrogating captured German commanders and scientists, trying to understand how much they'd known about various Allied technologies. When they got to the proximity fuse, the interrogators discovered something shocking. The Germans knew nothing. Complete, total ignorance. Max Wachtel told his Allied questioners that they'd suspected improved radar systems, or perhaps faster manual fuse setting techniques, but they'd never imagined self-thinking shells. The concept hadn't even occurred to them as a possibility. Then the Allied officers did something almost cruel. They brought in actual VT fuses and asked German scientists to examine them. The reactions were recorded in interrogation reports. First, flat disbelief. Accusations that the Allies were showing them fake devices. Then, when convinced the fuses were real and functional, shock. Then, something approaching humiliation. They couldn't comprehend how vacuum tubes had been made to survive 20,000 times the force of gravity. Couldn't understand how batteries could remain dormant for years and then activate instantly when needed. Couldn't grasp how delicate circuits continued functioning after being subjected to forces that should have pulverized them into dust. When asked to estimate how far behind German technology was, the consensus was 10 years. A full decade of research and development, compressed into a single Allied program they hadn't even known existed. Dr. Merle Tuve, who'd led the proximity fuse development at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, later reflected on why the program had succeeded where German efforts failed. It wasn't individual genius, he said. It was systematic collaboration between scientists, engineers, and production workers. Information sharing across institutions and disciplines. Democratic systems encouraging innovation from every level. Totalitarian systems, he noted, couldn't replicate that. When knowledge flows only upward to authority, and innovation requires permission from the top down, you lose the chaotic creativity that solves impossible problems. In September 1945, the proximity fuse was finally declassified. The War Department's announcement called it one of the most important weapons developed during the war, surpassed in effectiveness only by the atomic bomb. For the German scientists who'd spent months puzzling over why their V1s were failing at impossible rates, the revelation brought a final, crushing understanding. They hadn't been defeated by superior battlefield tactics or warrior courage. They'd been defeated by industrial capacity and collaborative innovation on a scale they hadn't imagined possible. By assembly lines, by factory workers earning overtime, by women working 12-hour shifts who didn't even know what they were building. The V1, which they believed represented the pinnacle of weapons technology, had been systematically neutralized by mass-produced electronics costing less than $20 each. They'd lost not to soldiers, but to a system. The final statistics tell their own story. Of the 9,521 V1s launched from ground sites against Britain, only 2,515 reached London. They killed 6,184 civilians and injured nearly 18,000 more. Numbers that are tragic, but represent a fraction of what Germany intended. General Frederick Pyle, who commanded Britain's anti-aircraft defenses, calculated that without proximity fuses, casualties would have been 4 to 5 times higher. The coastal gun belt's interception rate rose from 17% in June to 82% by late August. 10 weeks. That's how long it took to go from losing most V1s to destroying nearly all of them. And this transformation wasn't achieved through courage, training, or tactical brilliance. It was achieved through mass production of advanced technology on a scale Germany couldn't match or comprehend. America had mobilized its entire electronics industry, employed over 80,000 workers, invested over $1 billion 1940s dollars, produced 22 million fuses, all to solve a single problem, making near misses count as hits. The proximity fuse saved London. But more than that, it proved something fundamental about modern warfare. Germany produced brilliant individual weapons, rockets, jets, advanced tanks. America produced effective weapons by the millions. Perfect engineering lost to good enough engineering at scale. The technology that saved London went on to become the foundation for modern air defense systems, radar altimeters, and electronic warfare capabilities that still shape conflicts today. For Germany's former weapons scientists, it remained a permanent reminder of their wartime blindness. On that remarkable day in late August 1944, when Allied guns destroyed 82% of incoming V1s, the nature of warfare shifted forever. The Germans, launching those vengeance weapons, never understood what invisible technology was defeating them. They'd done everything right by their own understanding, developed advanced weapons, trained elite crews, achieved genuine technological breakthroughs. And they were defeated by mass-produced electronics they couldn't imagine, built by workers who didn't know what they were making, protecting a city that refused to fall. The proximity fuse was more than a weapon. It was proof that democracy's ability to mobilize science, industry, and human collaboration could overcome tyranny's forced brilliance. That distributed innovation beats concentrated genius. That in modern war, the industrial system matters more than any single miracle weapon. The Germans watched their perfect weapons fall burning from the sky, defeated by a secret they couldn't conceive and an industrial capacity they couldn't match. And they never knew why until it was far too late to matter.